Chega de mais impostos.
A gente precisa fazer uma observação antes. Nessa tarde aqui estaremos recebendo o Félix Maradiaga, no palco do Fórum da Liberdade. Porém, como consequência do governo autoritário da Nicarágua, Maradiaga foi impedido de sair do país. Ele tem um breve recado para a gente, contextualizando o motivo de sua falta. Vamos ver.
Hola, mi nombre es Félix Maradiaga. Soy el presidente de la Fundación para la Libertad de Nicaragua y ex candidato a la presidencia en las frustradas elecciones primarias en mi país en el año 2021. Esas elecciones fueron frustradas porque los principales candidatos de la oposición contra la dictadura de Daniel Ortega fuimos arrestados arbitrariamente. En mi caso, en una cárcel de máxima seguridad. Durante 611 días estuve en una condición de extremo aislamiento, sin acceso a ningún material de lectura, ni siquiera a una Biblia, que es fundamental para mi fe, tampoco a cartas de mi esposa, de mi familia, a quienes pasé más de 3 años sin poder ver. Tampoco tuve acceso a abogados y el juicio que se dio con acusaciones fabricadas de traición a la patria se llevó prácticamente en secreto dentro de la cárcel sin acceso al público. Fui sentenciado a 13 años de cárcel, pero gracias a una masiva presión internacional y gracias al papel heroico de mi esposa Berta, que durante mi secuestro se convirtió en mi voz, fui excarcelado el año pasado. Al sacarnos de la cárcel junto a otros 221 presos políticos, la dictadura de Ortega nos quitó la nacionalidad nicaragüense y nos dejó en condición de apatridia. Además nos confiscó nuestros bienes personales. Así que hoy vivo en Estados Unidos como apátrida, desde donde sigo impulsando mis mejores esfuerzos para ejercer presión internacional contra la dictadura. Sin embargo, al quitarme la nacionalidad, la dictadura ha hecho un daño grande en mi capacidad de poder viajar por el mundo. Y es por esa razón que con mucho pesar no puedo estar con ustedes físicamente en el Foro de la Libertad. Pero desde la distancia quiero compartir mi admiración a cada persona que está dando la batalla por las ideas de la libertad en un mundo cada vez más confundido, con una brújula ética moral distorsionada. Así que el caso de Nicaragua es solo un ejemplo extremo de un problema global más grande, que es el auge de la ola iliberal y de autocracia que le está robando la dignidad individual a las personas en el mundo. En mi país, esa dictadura ha forzado al exilio a casi el 15% de la población. Ha cerrado más de 26 universidades, 3.400 ONGs, entre ellas think tanks y organizaciones intelectuales, gremiales, humanitarias, organizaciones internacionales también. Pero la dictadura desde el año 2015 viene haciendo esto. Por ejemplo, ha llevado a la cárcel a más de 2.700 nicaragüenses, de los cuales aún 121 de ellos siguen en las cárceles. Además, ha lanzado una persecución religiosa que ha hecho de Nicaragua uno de los países con los mayores índices de persecución religiosa, a la par de Irán y de Corea del Norte. Pero lamentablemente aún hay miembros de la izquierda en el mundo que con mucha ignorancia o por otras razones apoyan al régimen de Ortega. Y es por esa razón que antes de despedirme quiero pedir a cada uno de ustedes que nos ayudemos mutuamente en esta lucha global por las ideas de la libertad. Esta no es una lucha que podemos hacer solos. Aquellos que tenemos una brújula bien calibrada, que sabemos el verdadero norte de nuestros principios, en los cuales la libertad individual es un factor vital de toda sociedad civilizada y pacífica. El caso de Nicaragua es una prueba de fuego para esos valores occidentales. Así que me despido con la esperanza de que esta fraternidad de liberales, estas redes, nos puedan ayudar a que juntos defendamos la libertad en cada país del mundo donde está amenazada.
Bom, a gente lembra que nós temos fones de tradução, esses fones estão disponíveis aqui na entrada da plenária. Vamos então para um assunto tão fundamental na nossa sociedade. A carga tributária reflete a complexidade de fazer negócios. Os impostos são uma forma coercitiva de arrecadação da riqueza gerada pelos cidadãos e empresas. Para demonstrar o que acontece quando diminuímos o tamanho do Estado ao impedir o aumento de impostos, recebemos hoje aqui Grover Norquist. Grover é presidente do Americans for Tax Reform, um grupo de defesa dos pagadores de impostos fundado por ele em 1985. A pedido do presidente Reagan, Norquist também preside a reunião de quarta-feira, um encontro semanal em Washington, D.C., iniciado em 1993. Ele é formado pela Universidade de Harvard e também autor de 4 livros e contribui para a American Spectator Magazine. Grover?
Hello, Brazil. Grover Norquist. I serve as president of Americans for Tax Reform. We present to all candidates for federal office and state office a simple pledge. It's in writing, and we ask for the candidate to sign that he or she will oppose and vote against all efforts to raise taxes. It's not that we don't trust them, but it's dated, and we ask for 2 witnesses. We take a picture of it, and we put it up on the internet. We have made real progress in turning the modern Republican Party into the party that will not raise your taxes. A Republican candidate may disappoint you in many different ways. He may invade small countries he can't pronounce. But he or she will not raise your taxes. You can go into the voting booth dead drunk and know that you are safe if you vote for the person with the R after their name. This has been a tremendous boost to the modern Republican Party. And if we can, that is the pledge in English. One of the important things about the Taxpayer Protection Pledge is that it's short. It is 1 sentence. There are no weasel words. No words where it's unclear what they mean. You either do or do not vote for a tax increase. It's also very moderate. We're not insisting you cut taxes 70% or 50%. The commitment is don't raise them. On other venues and other days, we will push to cut taxes. And with the pledge, tax cuts are more permanent victories because it is difficult to raise the tax once cut. This chart shows American history from your side, the left side, the blue end, 1932, all the way up to the present. Every little line is 2 years of American history from 1932 until today. You'll notice that for 62 years, up until that yellow line, for 62 years, the Republicans won control of the House, that's the bottom line, and the Senate, the top part, twice. 2 years under Truman, 2 years under Eisenhower. The rest of the time, we had a one-party state in the United States of America. Presidents do not run the country. The whole Constitution was designed to avoid a king. Presidents can veto bills, and then the Democratic Congress will wait until Eisenhower leaves. and then they will do what they want. And if Nixon wins the presidency, he can slow things down. But when he leaves, the Democrats passed what they wanted. So for 62 years, the Republicans had control of Congress for 4 years total. That yellow line is when 96% of Republican candidates and incumbents for office signed the pledge never to raise taxes, and they have kept it since, and they now win control of Congress half the time. We are competitive. We can, year after year, control Congress and, often, the presidency. Then you can change the country. Then you can change the country. I focused on taxes because I believed when I was 13 years old, and the teacher in the government school I attended said, elections don't matter. Nobody knows who their state representative is. People don't even know who their congressman is. And I thought there was a great deal of truth in that. Many people don't. But if the Republican Party could brand itself as the party that would not raise your taxes, you wouldn't have to know the name of your state representative or your congressman, just his or her party. When I was 13, very few people were willing to listen to what I thought about politics. Over time, however, we were able to bring in front of American politicians the idea of the Taxpayer Protection Pledge. Americans for Tax Reform, the taxpayer group that I run, was created by Ronald Reagan. It was set up independent of the White House, and it was my job to campaign for a tax cut that he was pushing through that had many, many changes, but it was a tax cut. And it reduced taxes to two rates, 15% and 27%. That was a significant tax cut for all Americans, and it reduced our tax rates to be very competitive in the world. I would like to talk about why taxation, instead of some other issue, as the central governing issue, because there are many issues, and elected officials have to make statements and take positions on many, many different positions. But if you think of who participates in a center-right political party, such as the Republican Party in the United States, who sits around the table when decisions are made? Who do elected officials listen to and build their movement around? I would argue that everybody around the Republican table wants one thing. On their vote-moving issue, on the issue that moves their decision on how to vote, not all issues, but on their vote-moving issue, what they want from the government is to be left alone. Just leave me alone. You can go around the table. Taxpayers, lower my taxes, leave me alone. Businessmen and women, do not regulate my business out of existence. Leave me alone. The various communities of faith in the United States, evangelical Protestants, conservative Catholics, Orthodox Jews, Muslims, Mormons, all they want is to be left alone. Leave us alone to practice our faith. They don't ask the government to pick the right one and enforce it. They don't ask for subsidies. They just wish to be left alone. For 18 years, I served on the board of directors of the National Rifle Association, and we campaign in defense of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is the one that says the American people may be armed and the government cannot interfere with their ability to defend themselves and to be armed. We've won some big, wonderful court cases recently on that. Those voters who vote on the Second Amendment, there are 5 million members of the NRA, there are 22 million Americans with a concealed carry permit, the permit to carry a gun concealed wherever they want to go. There are 27 states that don't require a permit. You can carry a gun if you want to, concealed. Most states allow open carry. As long as somebody can see the gun, it's okay. Just not concealed, unless you have a permit, which are fairly easy to get. People wish to be left alone. Education freedom, the ability to homeschool, illegal in most states in the United States as late as 1986. Go to jail illegal. Now, 3, maybe 5 million Americans homeschool. They will fight like the Dickens for that right. You cannot take that away from them. They are part of a coalition wishing to be left alone. I give you these examples from the American experience, but think in Brazil, what are the things the government does that really irritate people and would move them to action, to remember to vote, to encourage others to vote, to share information, and to become part of a political movement. A Leave Us Alone coalition is a low-maintenance coalition. There is no conflict on a primary vote-moving issue, because the person who wants to make money all day looks across the table at the person who wants to go to church all day. Doesn't bother me. That's not what I do. He doesn't do what I do. We're not in conflict. We lead different lives. And the two of them both look over at the guy who wants to fondle his guns all day and say, that's not what we do with our time. Not everyone has to vote for your candidate for the same reason. Not everyone has to belong to your party for the same reason, except there is a mega big issue of being left alone. That helps you find new voters, right? If you're looking for people who wish to be left alone, read the newspapers to find out who the government's busy screwing, and then talk to them about joining your team. I was asked when Hillary Clinton was in upstate New York, she was running for the US Senate in about 2000. She was doing a listening tour. A listening tour because if she'd been talking to the people in upstate northern New York, she would not have won the election. But because she was listening and not saying anything, they thought she was agreeing with them. Hillary said, what the progressives in America need is a meeting like the one Grover runs in Washington. And I chair a meeting of about 100 people that sit around at a big table, all the Leave Us Alone coalition participants and leaders, and 30 people present for 3 minutes, and then we go on. So everybody knows what everybody else is doing. We're always finding new people to join our coalition. And when the press said, what do you think of the idea that maybe the left would get a coalition meeting going, I said, well, what would be in that coalition? You'd have the union bosses, the corrupt big cities, the the government employees, people who are on welfare, people who make $120,000 a year, managing the dependency of others, making sure they don't get jobs and become Republicans, all the various woke groups that want to tell us how to run our lives, and because they're better than we are. The reason the tax issue is so important is the right, center-right, gets along because we're not in conflict and we all wish for a freer, more open society for our own selves and others. The left sits around a table, and it's like that scene in the movies where the bank robbery is finished and they're all back at their house and they count out the money. One for you, one for you, one for you, one for you. And as long as there's cash that the government can hand out to keep its constituencies happy and voting, the left is happy. But if that pile of money begins to dwindle in the center of the table, if the government doesn't have enough money to pay all of the various interests on the left to keep them happy, then the people around the table begin to look at each other a little bit more like the second to the last scene in those lifeboat movies. The movies where 7 people are on a lifeboat and there's not enough food for everybody. Now our friends on the left have to decide who they're going to throw overboard or who they're going to eat. If we do not feed them taxpayers, they will gnaw on the guy sitting next to them. They will push away from their table somebody expensive so that those resources go to them. If we say no new taxes and mean it, the left will not have enough money to keep all its constituencies, all its political structures together. They will begin to fight. They will push some away from the table, and at the next election, there will be fewer of them. And someone who leaves a government job or welfare and gets a real job is very likely to become a Republican. So we want them to push people away from the pot of gold because it's shrinking, because they become available as voters for us. The left is not made up of friends and allies. It is made up of competing parasites. They will eat each other if we don't feed them taxpayers. I came up with the idea of the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, looking to brand the Republican Party as the party that would not raise taxes, because I thought of how Coca-Cola brands its product. They make it easy to buy Coca-Cola. It looks the same. You know what's in it. It's the same ingredients, the same product, the same taste. And it's very easy to go to the store and pick one up. You don't have to read the label. You don't have to ask the proprietor, the shopkeeper, could I have a taste of this and see if I want to buy it? You know what it is. There's a certainty on what's there. However, if you get home and you are drinking your Coca-Cola and you look down now that you've drunk 2/3 of the Coca-Cola is now gone, and you notice that in what is left of your Coca-Cola, there is a rat head, you begin to wonder if you're going to drink all the rest of this bottle, you probably go and take pictures of it and show it to all your friends. So now Coca-Cola has a very big problem because you've damaged the reputation of Coca-Cola. Republican elected officials who vote for tax hikes are rat heads in a Coke bottle. They damage the brand for everyone else. And that helps keep them disciplined because everybody understands that. The pledge itself is unchanging year to year. It is simple, one sentence, no complicated words. It is radical to the left because supposedly sharks have to keep swimming to stay alive, and our friends on the left need more and more money to keep their party going at any given time. That's to keep it going. And the reason this has worked out for us is that in 1982, the President, Reagan, got tricked into $3 of tax spending cuts for every $1 of tax increase. And the tax increases were real, spending cuts didn't happen, spending got worse. Then when Bush got in, this is flashing at me, is it supposed to be? Oh, somebody tell me. 1982, Reagan got tricked into a tax increase. In '88, we had enough people take the pledge that President Bush, vice president, deciding to run for president, he took the pledge. He defeated Bob Dole, who refused to take the pledge, and on television in New Hampshire, all the other Republicans said, Senator Dole, you are winning this election right now, you're ahead in the polls, but we've all signed the pledge never to raise taxes, and you haven't. Will you? And they kind of tossed it at him. He reacted like a vampire that someone has thrown a crucifix at. It was a very bad look, you know. And he lost the primary, and he lost the election. Bush then went on to be 14 points behind Mike Dukakis, and at the election, at the convention, he said, the Democrats are going to come and ask for a tax increase, I'll say no. They'll come back and ask again, I'll say no. They'll come back again, and I will say, you may have heard this before, read my lips, no new taxes. Well, he won the election by 8 points. He was losing by 14. He promised never to raise taxes, and he won by 8. But 2 years later, in 1990, he got talked into a tax increase and spending cuts. The tax increase was real. The spending cuts never happened. Spending went up more than it was planned to before. So spending got worse and taxes got worse. And the man who, Bush, managed the collapse of the Soviet Union without a lot of blood on the floor, the man who kicked Iraq out of Kuwait and didn't stick around for a generation to look at stuff, he governed well with one problem. He lied his way into office, he broke his commitment, and he was thrown out of office to a nobody out of Arkansas. That is why in 1994, 96% of Republicans said, I got it, take the pledge, win the primary. Take the pledge, win the general. Keep the pledge, get reelected. Part 3. And that's the part, look, nobody's life is a complete waste. Some people serve as bad examples. And George Herbert Walker Bush served as a bad example. We have now taken that pledge, not only at the national level for presidents congressmen, and senators, but governors, state legislators, and we're beginning to go and work with mayors, school boards, and city councils. That often happens locally, independent of our leading the fight. People pick up on it and they just start doing it. But I think we'll be, in the next several years, not just federal and state, but also local as well. In Britain, the Tories now have 40 members who've taken the pledge not to raise taxes over the objections of the Prime Minister, whose attention they were working on getting. I believe at this point we'll have more than half of the Tories in Britain before the next election, and the Prime Minister will end up taking the pledge as well. Our friend Milei in Argentina signed the pledge. You may have seen the television show that he was on. He's like jumping around and he's signing the pledge, and the Argentinian tax reform group, that's a sister organization of ours, hands him the pledge. He signs it on TV, again, jumping around, and announces, if I ever break this pledge, I will cut off my arm. Now, we have not added that to the pledge in the United States, but we're thinking about it. But Milei's victory was very helpful, and the center-right folks in Paraguay have also expressed interest in doing a pledge there as well. Some of the traps to watch out for, because again, the left will constantly come back at us and say, you know, Democrats or men and women of the left are to taxes the way teenage boys are on a prom date. They keep asking the same question different ways. Our job is to say no, 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 no. No, no, yes doesn't work. No, 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 constant out. What they've offered us is they say, well, this time, we're only going to tax the rich. So, and that's how 3 Democrats have won elections for president. Clinton, I'll only tax people who make more than $150,000 a year. So the rest of you don't worry. As soon as he got elected, he tried to raise taxes on energy, paid for by everybody. Then Obama, I'll only raise taxes on people making more than $250,000 a year. First tax increase, cigarettes. Average income of a smoker, $50,000 a year. And then he had 8 taxes. Obama had 8 taxes for Obamacare on the middle class. And then we have Biden. I'll only tax people making more than $400,000. They keep raising the number because they get scared. They want to sort of convince people nobody except 3 or 4 people will get taxed. $400,000. And he's immediately turned down trying to raise taxes on energy, as well as a series of other taxes that directly hit low-income people. Politicians who say they will only tax the rich have not finished the sentence. They will tax the rich first, and then everyone else. Think of tax increases that have been imposed in Brazil. Our federal income tax was when it was put in, U.S. federal income tax 1913, was put in at a top rate of 7%. You had to make $1 million in today's dollars to pay 7%. Now the bottom rate is higher than 7%. So they start by taxing the rich and shift it. They also go in with, we're only going to tax corporations. Well, good news in the United States, polling shows people understand that if you tax a corporation, it will raise prices, so consumers will pay for it. They will pay lower wages because they don't have as much money. 70% of wages of what a company spends is on wages. So if you take $1,000 from them, that's $700 in wages that we don't have. And lastly, investors who've invested in the company could see it be worth less if it was taxed efficiently. And half of Americans are in the stock market with a 401k or an IRA. So yes, you can say you're only going to tax corporations, but there is no Mr. General Motors. They're only consumers and taxpayers. Consumers and workers and people who invest in companies. They come and say it's an emergency. We've been through this before. It's an emergency. And then lastly, we're going to replace this tax with a different tax. In New Jersey, they didn't like the high property taxes. So they said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to add a sales tax to reduce the high property tax. 10 years later, they hated the high property taxes and they had a sales tax. So they raised the income, they put in an income tax. So they started with just a property tax, which was too high. So they added a sales tax and everything was too high. And then they added income tax. Now they have a high income tax, a high sales tax, and the high property taxes. And if you have a tapeworm that irritates you, swallowing 2 more tapeworms does not make the first tapeworm less hungry. Tapeworms and taxes both grow at their own timing. Is that done? I'm sorry, can somebody tell me what the time is? Again, conflicting signals on time. Let me just close by suggesting that the Taxpayer Protection Pledge has been very helpful in giving unity to a party, in being a real gut check for the people who say they want to run for and with your party. And it makes it very easy for people of all backgrounds to say, I'm going to be voting for the party and the candidate that won't raise taxes. It's been extremely helpful in the United States. In all 50 states, it has elected a lot of people we wouldn't have elected otherwise. And I would love to work with all of you in thinking through how best to do something like that in Brazil. Thank you.
Obrigado, Grover. Bom, vamos chamar agora ao palco Luan Esperandil e o Juan Carlos Arruda, do ranking dos políticos que trazem aqui a proposta para a carta Taxpayer Protection Pledge. Luan e Juan, o palco é de vocês.
Senhoras e senhores, boa tarde a todos. Quero aqui, em nome do ranking dos políticos, agradecer o convite de estarmos aqui, a Fernanda Ritter, em nome do Fórum da Liberdade, cumprimentar o nosso governador e sempre eterno senador, deputado federal Ronaldo Caiado, deputado Marcel Van Hatten, em nome do Congresso Nacional, que bem avaliamos aí ao longo dos anos. Quero cumprimentar também nosso diretor de operações, Luan Esperandil, meu amigo e irmão, em nome do ranking dos políticos. Bom, senhoras e senhores, falando um pouco desse manifesto que o Grover, it's a great pleasure to stay here with you, my new friend, Grover, que nós faremos aqui no Brasil. Bom, queria contar antes um pouquinho a história do ranking dos políticos, brevemente, né? E aqui eu convido vocês a fazermos uma rápida viagem ao passado, ao longínquo ano de 2010. 2010 foi o ano em que Avatar estava no auge, filme do James Cameron. Foi o ano em que o Brasil saiu tímido da Copa da África do Sul, enquanto a Shakira cantava Waka Waka. Ao mesmo tempo, não imaginaríamos o vexame que viria à frente com o 7-1. Era um ano de esperança no Brasil, era o ano em que os campeões nacionais lidavam com a economia nacional, um ano em que o Brasil preconizava já a Copa do Mundo, as Olimpíadas. Bom, além disso, o Grêmio se sagrou campeão do Gauchão. Então, saudações aí aos gremistas. Para além disso, pessoal, foi um ano de suma importância, e aqui eu quero fazer uma pergunta, e gostaria que vocês se manifestassem, levantassem a mão. Quem aqui já tinha idade para votar em 2010? Levante a mão, por favor. Temos uma plateia até jovem aqui, mas 2010 foi o ano em que Dilma Rousseff se sagrou presidente da República, vencendo José Serra nas eleições. Bom, o cenário era de otimismo, mas um ano depois a catástrofe começava, né? Nós tínhamos ali um início do sinal da falência do nosso Estado brasileiro, sinais máximos da corrupção endêmica, sinal de um Estado perdulário. Era um sinal de que o Brasil já começava a dar problemas e mais à frente a gente viria onde isso iria desembocar. No ano de 2011, ontem nós tivemos aqui o Alexandre Ostrowiecki no palco principal, e o Alexandre falou um pouco da gênese do ranking dos políticos, mas ele não contou essa história. No ano de 2011, o Alexandre estava prestes a inaugurar uma de suas fábricas e, prestes a inaugurar, teve os equipamentos da fábrica plenamente roubados. A polícia local não teve condições de ir atrás. O Alexandre observou naturalmente que havia uma falência do Estado brasileiro. E ali ele saiu do sofá e foi, de fato, para a ação política e prática, né? Junto ao seu sócio, então, Renato Feder, eles decidiram observar, então, um poder que andava escamoteado. O brasileiro, na época, olhava muito mais para a eleição da presidência da República, mas o brasileiro não olhava para as eleições do Congresso Nacional. E foi no Congresso Nacional que eles encontraram a chance e a chama de ver a mudança no Brasil. Afinal de contas, é o Congresso Nacional que vota as leis, é o Congresso Nacional que fiscaliza o Poder Executivo, é o Congresso Nacional o detentor da chave do cofre do orçamento. E como foi a decisão que eles tomaram? Foi justamente colocar os parlamentares como se fosse numa escola, avaliando objetivamente, com critérios objetivos, não subjetivos, o parlamento brasileiro, observando como os parlamentares votam, se os parlamentares têm problema na justiça e como os parlamentares gastam os seus recursos públicos. Assim, então, nascia o ranking dos políticos. O ranking é uma ferramenta de monitoramento 24/7, funciona 24 horas por dia, observando sempre a atuação dos nossos 594 parlamentares. Bom, o ranking começou como um site, um portal. Foi crescendo, crescendo, hoje é uma grande instituição. Na verdade, hoje, quando falamos do ranking dos políticos, nós nos subdividimos em duas categorias. Nós temos o braço de educação cívica, mostrando para a população brasileira nas redes sociais, são quase 5 milhões de seguidores aí nas redes, e convido a quem não segue a seguir agora o ranking dos políticos nas redes, porque nós temos um papel de mostrar para a população brasileira o que se passa dentro do Congresso Nacional. E, para além disso, nós temos o braço interno, lidando diariamente com os parlamentares, orientando eles a como lidarem dentro do Congresso Nacional, dialogando com absolutamente todos os 594 parlamentares, sem preconceito de bandeira, sem preconceito partidário acima de tudo. E ao final do ano, nós buscamos premiar e valorizar aqueles parlamentares que se destacam, aqueles parlamentares que foram bem diante da legislatura, diante do nosso quadro de avaliação do ranking dos políticos. E, não obstante a isso, um dado muito importante que eu vos trago é que 74% dos nossos melhores parlamentares, dos parlamentares que se destacam dentro do ranking dos políticos, foram reeleitos em 2022. Em 2018, essa taxa foi de 72%, 72%, portanto, se reelegeram. Nós subimos 2 pontos na última eleição, que não foi uma eleição da dita renovação política. Eu falei um pouco da parte boa, da parte, contextualizei a parte interessante, a parte legal, mas eu vou chamar agora o nosso diretor de operações, o Luan Esperandil, para falar a parte ruim. Essa parte eu deixo com ele.
Boa tarde, Porto Alegre. É uma grande honra estar aqui em um evento, em um palco que há não tanto tempo assim eu só assisti pelo YouTube. A gente teve outras pessoas que passaram aqui e seguiram essa mesma linha, e eu acredito que, simbolicamente, isso mostra muito do grande impacto que esse Fórum de Ideias tem para a sociedade brasileira. Então, gostaria de agradecer todos os patrocinadores, todos os associados do IEE e todos os parceiros que dedicaram tempo, recursos e dinheiro para a gente estar aqui hoje. Muito bem, como o Juan disse, a parte ruim ficou comigo. Eu não sei se entre os patrocinadores do evento tem o Prozac, mas acho que as palavras que eu vou usar aqui, infelizmente, não me dão nenhum tipo de orgulho como brasileiro. Mas, fazendo referência ao livro que deu a origem, o tema do fórum de hoje, muitas vezes a gente sente que, diante de tantas distorções e absurdos que a gente tem dentro do nosso país, parece que boa parte dos brasileiros consomem a soma. E, por isso, a gente tem tanta negligência diante de determinadas situações que ocorrem, que eu vou começar a expor um pouco a partir de agora. Um ponto importante: não tem um foro melhor para falar sobre a taxação de impostos do que Porto Alegre, porque a primeira iniciativa da sociedade civil organizada aqui no Brasil, o primeiro evento de tax-free que a gente teve no Brasil foi em 2004, aqui em Porto Alegre, pelo Instituto Liberdade, o antigo Instituto Liberal de Porto Alegre. Então, por isso, a gente, em convite que recebemos do IEE, a gente está lançando um manifesto aqui hoje. Eu vou trazer aqui alguns dados, alguns talvez mais conhecidos, outros nem tanto. Felizmente, a gente está no dia 5 de abril e todos os esforços e todo o valor que foi agregado à sociedade dos presentes aqui foi para alimentar a máquina. E a nossa liberdade, ela vai chegar somente daqui quase 2 meses. E o que a casta, que é beneficiada pelo pagamento de impostos, diz? Ela fala que a carga tributária no Brasil não é tão alta assim. Ela fala simplesmente que outros países pagam muito mais impostos. Vocês estão reclamando de barriga cheia, 147 dias. A França são quase 200. A Dinamarca, a Suécia, a Itália, outros países pagam muito mais impostos do que o Brasil. Isso é quase como comparar coisas que não podem ser comparadas. É quase como comparar a capacidade de gestão, com todo o respeito, de Dilma Rousseff com o do Elon Musk. São coisas que não dá para comparar. Quando a gente faz uma comparação justa e compara o país com outras nações do BRICS, outros países de renda média e exportadores de commodities, somente Rússia, Cuba e Argentina pagam mais impostos do que o Brasil. Isso não é normal. Mas isso não é suficiente também. Se a gente pega e olha a última década, somente teve 1 ano que as contas do governo ficaram no azul. E esse ano, mais uma vez, elas vão ficar no vermelho. Como até mesmo ontem nós vimos o Mansueto Almeida discorrendo. Só que a casta quer mais. Então, é preciso de mais grandes ideias. Somente no ano passado, nós temos uma conjuntura em que medidas provisórias foram feitas para taxar de imediato. Mesmo que depois algumas delas foram rejeitadas pelo Congresso, elas geraram um efeito pelos 120 dias, e nós pagamos mais impostos. Foi assim com a medida provisória do CARF, foi assim com a taxação de exportação de produtos derivados do petróleo, por exemplo, e os impostos simplesmente aumentaram de um dia para o outro. Só que não parou por aí. Nós tivemos a taxação de fundos exclusivos, a taxação de offshores, tentaram acabar com o juros sobre capital próprio, mudaram, por medida provisória, as regras da subvenção de investimentos, mas não daqui para frente. Mudaram o passado para, dentro da tradição brasileira, seguir aquele ditado de que no Brasil até o passado é incerto. Só que não acabou por aí. Em breve, a gente vai ter mais uma tentativa de tributação da renda. A gente já paga a tributação do imposto de renda da pessoa jurídica, a gente já paga a CSLL, que é uma distorção que não existe em nenhum outro lugar do mundo, e agora eles vão tentar taxar também os dividendos. A máquina, ela precisa ser alimentada. E a popularidade caiu. E a gente sabe que quando a popularidade cai em um governo, vêm as grandes ideias e pacotes de maldades também, que no longo prazo geram prejuízo. E já que a gente já paga muito imposto, como que fica na balança? O Brasil dizem que é o país do futebol. A gente só ganhou a Copa 5 vezes, mas a gente já ganhou o campeonato de país que tem a pior retorno de impostos do mundo 12 vezes consecutivas. E a gente vai ganhar de novo esse ano. Isso não é normal. E a pergunta que eu queria deixar aqui é: quando que isso vai parar? Quando que vai chegar a hora dos brasileiros se libertarem da soma e simplesmente dizer: chega de mais impostos, governo? Obrigado.
(147) Esse é o número de dias por ano que o brasileiro trabalha para o Estado. Até 1994, o financiamento da máquina pública era por meio da inflação. Com o Plano Real, o imposto inflacionário deu lugar aos mais de 90 impostos que temos hoje. Os impostos alimentam não só os serviços públicos e o auxílio à população, mas infelizmente também privilégios de uma casta que está longe de serem os mais pobres. Há 12 anos, o retorno da carga tributária no Brasil é o pior entre 30 nações analisadas, segundo o IRBIS, Índice de Retorno de Bem-Estar à Sociedade. Em vez de se tornar investimentos em áreas essenciais, o dinheiro retirado do bolso do trabalhador está sendo desperdiçado, e o governo quer mais. É hora de dizer chega aos sacrifícios do cidadão em prol de um Estado que falha em promover o básico. Convocamos todos os brasileiros a se unirem a nós neste manifesto contra a carga tributária abusiva. Chega de pagar a conta. Assine o manifesto e envie uma mensagem clara aos políticos. O povo não aguenta mais.
Bom, senhoras e senhores, fica o convite a qualquer membro da sociedade civil que assine esse manifesto e, da mesma forma, nós, enquanto ranking dos políticos, faremos a entrega oficial aos 594 gabinetes dentro do Congresso Nacional para que os nossos parlamentares também assinem esse mesmo manifesto. É hora de enfrentarmos de maneira firme aqueles que são pusilânimes, e aqui eu faço referência, ontem eu descobri o que é pusilânime com o nosso ministro Marco Aurélio, então quem não descobriu, pesquise no Google, é muito importante. Mas, brincadeiras à parte, minha gente, é um momento muito sério, é um momento, de fato, que a gente não aguenta mais esse gigante Estado brasileiro que cada vez mais nos pressiona. E, de uma maneira muito eficiente, nós tivemos duas vozes que ecoaram e toparam serem os primeiros signatários desse manifesto, e eu gostaria de convidá-los para esse ato, tanto o deputado Marcel Van Hatten, do Novo do Rio Grande do Sul, em nome do Congresso Nacional, ser o primeiro signatário dessa carta, e da mesma forma, em nome do governo do Estado de Goiás, o governador Ronaldo Caiado aqui ao palco.